punished to be rented by 10 men in one night for her debts, until first man who took her fell in love. The auction hall on Arendril, too, is built to look clean, efficient, and modern. Its walls are smooth glass, its floor white tile that reflects the overhead strip lights. Security checkpoints hum quietly at the entrance. The system is designed to keep everything orderly and sterile, even when the business itself is brutal, selling human or alien bodies to cover debts. Frank Droz walks in with a receipt chip in his hand. He is in his late 30s, tall, broad-shouldered, with a stiff posture that gives away his military past. Years ago, he served as a scout in the frontier regiments. He hasn't worn a uniform in a long time, but the discipline stayed in his body. Now he works as a logistics scheduler, tracking cargo routes, docking slots, and worker hours. A job that looks dull on the outside, but requires precision. It pays enough to live, but not enough to silence the loneliness that has been pressing on him for years. Tonight, he came here to buy 1 hour, nothing more, or so he tells himself. On the other side of the curtain stands Arian. She is 26, a Zyrene Allen hybrid. Her violet skin and obsidian hair make her stand out even in a city where dozens of species mix. She was married once. Her husband's ship was seized after he died, and the dock tribunal transferred the lien, 2,000 credits, onto her. With no family and no guarantor, the state converted the debt into body hours. That's why she is here, under the lights, in a shimmering gown that exposes far more than it covers. The robe is designed to humiliate, not protect. She keeps her chin level anyway. She is furious, terrified, but determined not to show either. The clerk recites her value in hours, explains the terms without looking at her, and announces the first bidding window. Frank scans his tag. The terminal flashes green. Room 12, the clerk says. Timer starts at entry. The corridor is quiet. Frank keeps his steps steady. Inside, the room is smaller than he expected. A single bed bolted to the wall, a metal table, a glass carafe of Orvan water, and a camera bulb in the corner. Everything is functional, controlled, clinical. Arian enters behind him and stops when the door seals. The click of the lock makes her shoulders tense. No need for names, she says, her voice steady but forced. Frank studies the camera. We'll talk first. That's not what you paid for. I paid for time. I'll use it how I want. That makes her look at him properly. No gratitude, just caution. She sits on the bed edge, knees together, robe falling open in a way that's calculated by design. He sees the discomfort in her hands pressing the fabric down. He lowers the overhead light, angling the glare across the camera lens. That won't blind it, she says quietly. It will make it lazy, overexposed. He points to the corner. We stay low there, it sees less. She narrows her eyes, studying him. You know how these rooms work. I've seen enough rooms with cameras. The timer begins counting down from 1 hour. Frank pours 2 glasses of water, sets one in front of her, and takes a sip from his own. She hesitates, then drinks. He feels a flicker of something he hasn't felt in years. The tension of another person's trust, even if it's small, even if it's reluctant. What do you want me to be? She asks. Present, he says. That's not a role. It's the only one I care about. She stares at him, surprised. No client ever spoke to her like that. Frank doesn't explain further. He doesn't want to explain. He just watches her, calm but alert, like he's on patrol again. He notices her breathing, the way her pulse beats under her skin, the way her robe keeps slipping from her shoulder, and she fights the instinct to pull it up. Inside, Arian's thoughts race. Every man before him has wanted the same thing. To own the hour fully, to use her body like an object. Frank is different, and that unsettles her. He isn't rushing. He isn't forcing. That makes her wonder what he really wants, and whether she should let her guard down. Fear tightens her stomach, but curiosity edges in, softening the fear. He lifts a hand, open, waiting. She hesitates, then places her fingers in his. His touch is firm, but not demanding. He helps her stand. If I say no, you stop, she says. Yes. If I say nothing, you ask. Yes. She breathes once deep. Then she takes his hand and presses it lightly to her neck. His palm rests over her pulse, steady but not pushing. Her breath quickens, but she doesn't pull away. "Take the pins," she says, voice low. He slides his fingers through her hair and finds the clips. They snap loose, and her black hair falls across her shoulders. She places her hands on his chest, firm. He leans closer. Their lips meet. The kiss is deliberate, not hurried. Her body tenses, then slowly eases. His hand doesn't wander. It stays where she placed it. For Frank, the contact burns through the quiet shell he's built around himself. He wanted release, a distraction. But this feels like more, like someone alive in his arms, not just a body rented by the state. It shakes him. They move to the bed. The robe slips further. They touch, careful but charged, both aware of the camera, but ignoring it. Heat builds between them. Her fear mingles with his restraint. She tests him with every pause. He waits, every time, until she chooses to continue. That choice makes the encounter different. Real. When they rest, the silence is thick but not empty. Arian sits up, robe clutched to her chest, eyes fixed on the floor. "You think you're different," she says bitterly. "I think I decide," Frank answers. Her gaze snaps to him. He doesn't look away. Something shifts in her face, uncertainty mixed with interest. She doesn't know if he's a liar or a fool, but she knows he's not like the others. The timer chimes. Their hour is nearly done. Frank stands, smooths the room back to order, angles the light straight again. He ties her sash slowly, carefully, making sure she's covered. She lets him. At the door, he turns. "I'll be back." She frowns. "Don't return out of pity." "I don't do pity," he says flatly. "I don't like how they wrote your story. I'll write it different." For a moment, her anger falters. She doesn't answer. He steps into the corridor, shoulders squared like he's already planning his next move. Alone, Arian touches the tied sash where his hands had been. She hates herself for feeling even the smallest spark of safety in that gesture. She hates the system more. But for the first time, she doesn't feel completely defeated. The morning on Arindril, too, is colorless. Light filters through layers of glass and steel, falling flat on the walkways. The city wakes on time, as always, trams whispering across rails, food dispensers cycling their first batches, clerks swiping in at offices. Frank Droz moves through the stream with his shoulders squared, his coat collar pulled up, his jaw set. He did not sleep well. The hour with Arian kept circling in his mind. Not only the touch, but the way she looked at him when he said he would return. It wasn't gratitude. It was disbelief mixed with warning. He knows she expects him to vanish like everyone else. He stops at the Ledger House, a tower with glass doors and a line of debtors already waiting. Inside, the air is cold, smelling faintly of ionized metal. The clerks sit behind clear partitions, faces impassive, fingers tapping at terminals. Frank approaches one. "I want to settle an auction sentence. Full buyout." His voice is calm, but he can feel the edge of impatience pushing under his ribs. The clerk barely glances up. "Case number, Arian, Zyrene Allohybrid, Doc Lean." Keys clatter. A screen glows between them. The figure appears in red. Debt, 2,000 credits. Penalties, 3,000. Bond conversion fee, 1,200. Total, 6,200. Frank's throat tightens. He has savings, but nowhere near enough to erase that number. The clerk smirks faintly. "You're late to mercy. Debt compounds by the hour. That's the cost of freeing your purchase." Frank says nothing. He transfers everything he can. His savings account drained, a wage deduction authorized, a storage lease canceled. The clerk accepts the credits with a blink of surprise. The number drops, but not enough. "All you've done," the clerk says flatly, "is freeze her auction for 48 hours. If you don't cover the remainder, she goes back on the block." Frank takes the stamped receipt without a word. His jaw locks tighter, his mind already calculating what he can sell next. The soldier in him measures the problem as terrain. Not impossible, just costly. He doesn't go home. Instead, he heads to the holding ward, a gray corridor where those under auction contracts are kept between sessions. The attendant shrugs when Frank shows the freeze order. "She's in room 6. Don't touch unless you booked. Rules." Frank nods once. He knows how to bend rules without breaking them. Inside, Arian is sitting on a narrow bed, her robe folded neatly beside her. Her hair is tied back, her posture straight, her eyes sharp the moment she sees him. She notices the bag in his hand. Another hour? Her voice is cool, defensive. No, he answers. He sets the bag down. I bought time. She blinks at that. Not relief, confusion. Time isn't food. He unpacks the bag. Frozen seed coffee in a thermos, Zyron bread chips, and 2 metal cups. He pours. Steam curls into the sterile air. He hands her one. She hesitates, then accepts it, fingers brushing his. The warmth lingers on her skin. They sit on the floor instead of the bed. The distance is deliberate. She chews a chip slowly, eyes narrowing. You emptied your account for this, didn't you? I did. You're a fool. Maybe. He takes a sip, the bitter taste grounding him. But I don't walk out halfway. Her laugh is short and bitter. You think this is halfway? My debt isn't yours to carry. It is now. She studies him for a long moment. His expression doesn't change. His gaze is steady, like a man who has already fought through worse than an account balance. She looks down, chewing the last of the bread chip. For the first time, Frank speaks about himself. I was a scout. Frontier regiment. Years back. I got out, took this job. Been alone since. His words are blunt, stripped down. No drama. Just fact. Arian tilts her head. You act like a soldier. Even in here. It's habit. Or control. Both. Silence stretches, broken only by the hum of the vent. She lowers her cup, sets it on the floor, and says, You came for my body. Admit it. I did. And now? Now I want the rest. Her chest rises sharply. She looks away. That answer rattles her more than if he had lied. She doesn't want to believe him. Belief is dangerous. Yet she remembers his touch, firm, but never forcing. The way he tied her sash before leaving. It makes her wonder if he meant what he said at the door. When the attendant knocks, Frank rises. He offers his hand. She doesn't take it, but she doesn't tell him to leave either. I'll be back after shift, he says. You work too much. I do what I decide. Her lips twitch, almost a smile. Almost. Then decide fast. 48 hours isn't long. He nods once and leaves. She watches the door close, her fingers curling over the cup he left behind. Is still warm. For the first time since her husband died, warmth feels like something that might last. Frank left the ward with her words still pressing into his chest. 48 hours isn't long. The numbers ran in his head like mission markers. What he'd already paid, what remained, what resources he could burn to cover the gap. By the time he finished his shift at the logistics office, he knew exactly which assets to cut. A storage locker with tools he hadn't used in years. A battered chrono watch from his service days. An old field kit he carried more from memory than use. Every item became a number. Numbers became time. And time was what Arian didn't have. That evening he booked her hours again. Not to use her, but to block anyone else. The clerks didn't argue. As long as his credits cleared, no one cared about motive. The booking receipt gave him 2 hours, enough to sit with her without interruption. The room looked the same as before. White walls, a bed, the camera in the corner. But this time, Frank carried a small travel bag. Inside were basics, a cotton shift, sealed new, a towel, a hair tie, and another thermos of frozen seed coffee. He placed the bag on the table. Arian stared at it like it was something dangerous. What's in it? She asked. Clothes. Clean. You don't have to wear that robe if you don't want to. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because dignity isn't a privilege. She said nothing, only pulled the bag closer, inspecting the contents. The shift was plain, soft, meant for sleeping. After a long pause, she stood. Step into the hallway. 1 minute. Frank obeyed without hesitation. He stood in the hall, hands behind his back, posture steady. When the door opened again, she wore the shift. It hung loose on her frame, but she held herself straighter than before. Something about that small change hit him harder than he expected. They sat cross-legged on the floor. Arian finally spoke about her debt in detail. The ship wasn't mine. My husband owned it. When he died, the tribunal transferred the lien to me. The guarantor defaulted. They said someone had to pay, so they turned me into the currency. Her voice stayed even, but her hands twisted the fabric of the shift. Frank listened without interruption. He had already guessed parts of her story, but hearing it in her own words carried weight. "I know the statute," he said quietly. "Of course you do," she answered, her mouth twitching into the first almost smile he had seen on her. "Men like you always do." For the first time, he let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. It wasn't humor, it was recognition. He took the towel, ran it under the sink spout until it warmed, and offered it to her without a word. She hesitated, then accepted. She cleaned her face, neck, and shoulders, movements careful, precise. He didn't watch too closely. Restraint was part of his training, part of how he stayed in control. But he felt the air shift when she stepped closer, her palm resting against his chest. "We can," she said simply, not to please him, not to appease the ledger, but because she chose it. Frank nodded once. He moved slow, deliberate, angling his body so the camera caught little. When they kissed, it was not staged. It was sharp with hunger, but grounded in her decision. They moved together, the cotton shift rising and falling, his hand strong but careful, hers searching but steady. For the first time in months, she wasn't performing. She was present. Afterward, she lay against his shoulder, their breathing slowing in sync. She said nothing. Neither did he. The silence felt different this time. Not empty, not forced, but heavy with what had passed between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "You came to me for one reason. Admit it." "I came for release," Frank answered. "I stayed because of you." Her fingers traced a line along his forearm, stopping at a pale scar. "What did this?" "Metal edge. Field accident. You kept the hand steady anyway." "Yes." She nodded, thoughtful. The weight in her expression wasn't disbelief anymore. It was something closer to recognition, the same thing he had felt earlier. The chime signaled their time was almost over. Frank stood, repinned the light, smoothed the bed. He left no trace for the cameras. Arian watched him with an expression she tried to hide, but couldn't fully. Before leaving, he turned to her. "I'll be back tomorrow." "You're stubborn," she said, half bitter, half resigned. "I'm consistent," he replied. She almost smiled again, but instead said, "If you fail, I'll hate you. Then I won't fail." He left the room with his jaw set, his stride firm. Arian sat on the bed, her fingers brushing the plain, cotton shift at her knees. For the first time since her sentencing, she felt the smallest spark of control, because he had given her choice and she had taken it. The next day began with the same sterile rhythm. Trams gliding on schedule, clerks logging in at terminals, cargo slots rotating in quiet cycles. Frank Droz moved through the corridors of a ledger house, as if the city's order no longer applied to him. The only number he carried in his head was Arian's balance, and every credit he could strip from his life to close it. He sold his old chrono watch, the one scratched and worn from service years, and pawned his field kit. He signed away another cut of his wages. It was enough to push the debt closer to the finish line, though not over. The clerk barely looked at him, just stamped the transfer and muttered, "Still short. Another deadline tomorrow." Frank took the stamped slip without reply. He had learned long ago that words wasted on clerks didn't change outcomes. Action did. That evening, he booked her hours again. The attendant didn't bother asking why. Frank's name was already becoming familiar in the ward. He stepped inside the small room and stopped. Arian was no longer in the robe. She wore the cotton shift he had given her, her hair damp from a careful wash at the sink. She sat on the bed with her legs folded, back straight, eyes locked on him as if measuring whether he had kept his promise. "You came back," she said flatly, though her voice carried something beneath it. Uncertainty, maybe even relief. "I said I would." She studied him for a long moment, then glanced at the folded receipt in his hand. "How much?" "Enough to freeze it again. Not enough to finish." Her mouth tightened. "You're burning yourself for me. I'm choosing. There's a difference." He set the slip aside and sat on the floor with his back to the bed. After a pause, she slid down beside him until their shoulders touched. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like a battle. It felt like breathing space. "What do you want from me?" she asked, voice steady now. Plain, he said. Plain. I want you in my home. Not rented, not caged. I want to wake and see you there, because you want to be, not because a tribunal says so. Her jaw tightened, but her hand inched toward his, resting on his thigh. Men say many things. I don't say what I can't do. She turned to him sharply, searching his face. He didn't flinch, didn't smile, just held her stare. The room's air seemed heavier as she leaned forward, brushing her lips against his. The kiss deepened, not careful this time, but certain. Her hand pulled us to her thigh and left it there, a deliberate gift of choice. He squeezed once, then let her guide him. They lay together on the bed, their movements unhurried but charged. The shift rose, her breath quickened, and his control held firm until she tugged him closer. They came together not as strangers locked in a transaction, but as two people reclaiming something denied them for too long. After, Arian sat cross-legged, eating Zyron bread chips from the bag he had brought. She chewed slowly, watching him with narrowed eyes. You talk like a soldier, she said. Old habit, he answered. And stubborn. Always. She looked at the floor for a moment, then back at him. If you fail, I will hate you. He didn't blink. Then I won't fail. The words hit her harder than she wanted to admit. She lay back on the bed, arms folded under her head, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, she didn't feel like an object rented by the hour. She felt like someone seen. The chime warned the session was almost over. Frank stood and adjusted the light, the table, and the sheets as always, restoring the room to its sterile state. She watched him work with that same half-hidden expression, somewhere between suspicion and reluctant trust. When he reached the door, she asked quietly, Why me? He stopped, hand on the panel. He didn't turn. Because you didn't break. And because I was already broken. Her breath caught. He left before she could reply, the door sealing behind him. Alone, Arian lay back, hand pressed her chest, her pulse heavy. For the first time since her sentencing, she realized she wanted the next hour not to end. The morning felt longer than usual. Frank rose before the trams began their runs, drinking cold Orvan water straight from the tap because he couldn't spare credits for coffee today. His reflection in the glass pane above the sink looked harder than he remembered, jawline tight, eyes ringed with fatigue. He didn't mind the exhaustion. What pressed on him was the ticking clock. One mistake, one shortfall, and Arian would be dragged back into the auction hall. At the logistics office, he worked with machine precision, slotting cargo vessels into berths, checking manifests, signing off delays. His co-workers noticed his silence, but said nothing. A joke floated near his desk, something about burning pay on a pretty face, but he ignored it. Years in uniform had taught him that not every fight deserved his time. He had one mission, and every credit he earned had already been spent in his head. By the end of the shift, he walked straight to the ledger house and dropped another payment on the counter. The clerk flicked eyes up at him this time, studying the way he kept returning, stripping himself bare to cover someone else's debt. You're close, the clerk said with a curl of the lip. But you're not finished. If you stall, she's gone. Frank pocketed the stamped receipt without reply. Clothes wasn't enough. That evening he brought food, a small thermos of larnberry porridge, and a pouch of Drax and mushroom stir-fry from a side stall. He knew she hadn't had a proper meal in days. The ward fed bodies, not people. The guard barely glanced as Frank signed in, already used to his face. Arian was waiting on the bed, sitting upright in the cotton shift. When he set the food down, her eyes lingered on the steam curling from the porridge. You think feeding me changes what I am to this place? She asked, her tone sharp. No, Frank answered, opening the thermos. It changes what you are to me. That silenced her. She picked up the spoon, blew lightly, and tasted. Her shoulders eased a fraction. It's hot, she muttered, almost accusing. Good. Means you'll remember it wasn't rations. She finished half before setting the spoon down, watching him from across the room. You never told me why you left the regiment, she said. Frank looked at the floor, then back at her. Too many years of being told who lived and who didn't. I wanted to decide something for myself. And now you decide for me? He shook his head slowly. No, I'm fighting for you to decide. Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned her face away, hiding whatever showed there. Later, when she reached for him, it wasn't hesitant. She pulled him close, her mouth hard on his, her body warm against his. The shift rode up, his hand strong on her waist. The camera hummed faintly, ignored. This time they weren't careful. Trust had built muscle, and desire carried them further. The sound of her breath against his neck, the press of her nails against his shoulder, none of it felt like performance. Afterward, they lay still, their bodies tangled, her cheek against his chest. She drew idle lines across his skin with her fingertip. "Why me?" she asked again, softer this time, as if she truly wanted an answer. Frank's voice was quiet but firm. "Because you're the first person I've seen in years who refuses to fold." Her throat tightened. She bit back the wave of emotion threatening to break through and only said, "If you lose, I'll never forgive you." He cupped her jaw gently, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Then I won't lose." She searched his face, expecting bravado. What she found instead was discipline. Hard, controlled, unshakable. It rattled her more than any boast. When the chime finally sounded, Frank stood, adjusted the sheets, and prepared the room for the next inspection as always. Arian sat on the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She watched him with an expression she didn't try to hide this time. Fear mixed with hope, anger mixed with longing. At the door, Frank paused. "Tomorrow more." She nodded once. "Don't come back with excuses." "I don't carry excuses." The door shut. She sat alone, her pulse heavy, her body still warm from his touch. For the first time, she didn't wonder if he would return. She wondered how much of herself she was willing to give when he did. The next morning, the city's rhythm continued as if nothing mattered. Trams on time, clerks in gray coats, workers scanning in and out. But Frank walked through it with the weight of a deadline pressing behind his ribs. He hadn't slept properly. Every calculation replayed in his head. The balance, the bonds, the penalties. He was close. Too close for comfort. At the ledger house, the clerk greeted him without interest, tapping at the screen as Frank laid down another payment. But when the system processed it, the clerk frowned, then smirked. Bad news. Demand modifiers recalculated overnight. Her debt's been restructured. You still owe more. A lot more. Frank's hand flexed into a fist on the counter. How much? 80% higher. Penalties compounded. The clerk's tone was casual, almost amused. You're running uphill on a cliff. One slip, she goes back into rotation. The figure burned on the screen. It wasn't impossible, but it was brutal. Frank's jaw tightened. He signed another wage reduction without hesitation, draining the last of his savings, authorizing deductions that would strip his account bare for months. Even then, the debt didn't vanish. It just stalled for one more day. The clerk leaned back, bored. You can't win. Not with this system. Frank pocketed the slip, his voice level. I don't walk out. He turned and left before the clerk could reply. By the time he reached the ward, his mind was already locked on the problem. He didn't want her to hear the news from anyone else. The attendant waved him through, almost lazily. Room 6. She's waiting. Inside, Arian sat cross-legged on the bed, the cotton shift clinging damply to her shoulders from another wash at the sink. Her eyes went to his face immediately, reading it. You look like a man who failed, she said sharply. Frank closed the door behind him. I didn't fail, but they changed the terms. Penalties went up overnight. Her mouth twisted. Of course they did. That's how they keep us locked. You should have known. I did, he said evenly. I've seen systems like this, designed to break you before you reach the end. But I'm not leaving it there. Her eyes narrowed. You think you can outrun a machine that feeds on people like me? You'll drown yourself first. I swim, he said, voice steady. That answer made her snap. She stood quickly, the shift sliding against her legs, anger flashing across her face. Stop talking like a soldier. You're not saving a platoon. You're just one man throwing himself in a fire for a woman you barely know. Frank didn't move. He stood where he was, posture calm, shoulders squared. I know enough. Enough to decide. Her breath came fast, chest rising and falling. She wanted to hate him for his certainty, but it was the same certainty that made her knees weak. She pressed her hands against the wall, trying to steady herself. You're a fool. Maybe, but I'm your fool now. She turned, eyes shining, anger cracking into something else, fear. And if you lose everything, what then? What am I supposed to do with that guilt? You don't carry it, Frank said. His voice softened, but the steel remained underneath. I chose this fight. You didn't. The room went silent. Arian's hands lowered slowly. Her breathing steadied. She sat back down on the bed, her shoulders tight, her face turned away. You're too calm. It scares me more than if you shouted. Frank stepped closer, not touching her, just standing near enough that she felt the heat of his body. Calm isn't weakness. It's control. And control keeps us alive. For a long time, she didn't answer. Then she shifted, pulling her knees to her chest. If I stay here much longer, I'll stop believing you. That's what they want. To make me think you'll give up like everyone else. He crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes. Then don't believe them. Believe me. Her lips trembled. She hated that she wanted to. Hated that some part of her already did. With a sharp motion, she grabbed his shirt and pulled him forward, kissing him hard, almost angrily. He kissed her back with the same intensity, holding her face in both hands. The bed creaked as she pushed him down, straddling him, her breath ragged, her body trembling. This wasn't performance. It was defiance, a way of drowning out fear with touch. When they finally broke apart, she sat back, panting, hair falling around her face. If you fail, she whispered, I'll never forgive you. Frank touched her cheek with a steady hand. Then I won't fail. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against his. For the first time, she didn't argue. The chimes sounded, warning the end of their time. Frank stood, adjusting the room with his usual precision. Arian watched him, her chest still heaving, her thoughts running wild. She had sworn to herself not to believe, but she was starting to, and that terrified her more than the auction ever had. When Frank reached the door, she said softly, almost against her will, come back. He turned, his gaze steady, his voice quiet. Always. The door sealed. Arian sat alone, hands gripping the sheets, fear and hope battling inside her. For the first time, the idea that she might actually be free didn't feel like a cruel joke. It felt close. Too close. The city of Arindril, too, did not pause for human decisions. Its trams glided, its schedules rotated, its clerks tapped at terminals with the same bored rhythm as the day before. But Frank Droz moved through it like a man carrying weight that none of the others could see. Every step, every credit transfer, every object pawned was part of one mission: reduce Arian's debt to nothing before the system could crush them both. That morning he made his final cuts. He sold the jacket stitched with his old regiment insignia, the one he had kept hidden in the back of his locker for years. He sold a roll of frontier maps he once studied to feel alive when his new life felt too narrow. Both were gone in minutes. By afternoon, he had enough credits for the last transfer. Not all of it, but close enough that the ledger clerk leaned back in his chair with new interest. You're stubborn, the clerk said, stamping the receipt. Another day, and you might close it. Strange thing, spending yourself down for a woman with an expiry tag. Frank held his gaze jaw tight. Strange to you, not to me. He pocketed the slip and left without another word. That evening, the ward guard didn't even bother checking his name. Room 6, he muttered. She's already expecting you. Inside, Arian was sitting on the floor this time, not the bed. She wore the cotton shift, her hair braided loosely down her back, her knees pulled up against her chest. When she saw him, her eyes flickered. Relief first, then suspicion, as if relief itself frightened her. You look poorer, she said dryly. I am. He set down a small bag, a pouch of mushroom stir-fry and a flask of Frozen coffee. She eyed it, then him. Tell me how much is left. He sat across from her, knees brushing hers. One day more. Then it's done. Her face tightened. She leaned forward, searching him. You'll starve yourself for me, if that's what it takes. Her laugh was bitter, low. You're not noble, Frank. I see it in your eyes. You came to me for one reason. You don't get to dress it up now as sacrifice. He didn't argue. I came to you for release. I stayed because I chose you. The words landed heavy. She looked away, chewing slowly on the food he'd brought, her hands trembling just slightly. For weeks, no one had chosen her for anything but punishment. No one had seen her as more than an hourly line in a ledger. She hated how much his certainty unsettled her. After they ate, she set the cup down hard, eyes flashing. What happens when you wake up and I'm not worth it anymore? When the system eats me anyway, you think your discipline will save you from that? Frank leaned forward until his voice was the only thing between them. I don't wake up doubting decisions. I commit and I see them through. That's the difference between me and the others. Her chest rose sharply, breath caught. She wanted to break him with her words, but his calm pushed against her fear like a wall she couldn't move. She shifted closer, her knee brushing against his, her eyes locked on his. "Show me," she whispered. He didn't need to ask what she meant. He reached for her slowly, letting her guide the pace. Their mouths met with urgency, her body pressing into his hands steady on her waist. The cotton shift slid up as she pulled him down with her, kissing him like she wanted proof, not comfort. He gave it to her, firm, controlled, certain, his touch never wavering. The room grew warm with their movements, their breath harsh against each other's skin. Afterward, she lay on top of him, her hair spread across his chest, her hand resting over his heart. She listened to it beat, steady and strong. "You're too calm," she murmured, almost accusing. "Calm keeps us alive," he answered. Her fingers curled into his shirt. "If you finish this, if you make me free, I'll stay. But not as property, not as payment, as me." He tilted his head, meeting her gaze. "Good, that's what I want." She studied him for a long time, eyes burning with both challenge and something softer. "And if I change my mind, then you walk. I won't stop you." The silence that followed was heavy, but different than before. Not distrust, something closer to fragile respect. For the first time, Arian realized he meant it, and that scared her more than chains. When the chimes sounded, she didn't move away immediately. She stayed pressed against him until the second warning tone forced her to rise. Frank adjusted the sheets, restored the light, and prepared the room for inspection as always. She watched him with an expression she couldn't quite hide anymore. Fear, yes, but also the beginning of belief. At the door, he paused. "Tomorrow, no more waiting." Her throat tightened. She didn't want to hope, but she couldn't stop. "If you fail," she said again, voice trembling, "I'll hate you." He looked at her steadily. "Then I won't fail." The door sealed behind him. Arian sat back on the bed, her knees pulled up, her heart pounding. For the first time since her husband's death, she let herself imagine tomorrow as something more than survival. The next morning, Frank woke before the city lights shifted from night cycle to day. His small apartment was bare now, walls stripped of maps, shelves empty of tools, closet missing the jacket he had once considered untouchable. He sat on the edge of his bed, boots laced, staring at his chipped chrono. He had nothing left to sell, nothing but himself. At the ledger house, the clerk's expression changed when he saw Frank. No smirk this time, just recognition. The man who had kept returning, stripping away his life for a single woman in the system. Frank laid down the last bundle of credits, the final wage contract he had signed that morning, binding himself to half rations for months. The screen blinked, the number hit 0. The clerk pressed his stamp down with deliberate slowness, almost disappointed. "Debt cleared," he said. "Status free." A slip printed out with Arian's name across the top. Plain, clinical, almost insulting in how little weight the words carried for the cost they demanded. Frank took the paper and walked out without a word. In the ward, the attendant blinked when Frank presented the release. "You're serious?" "Open the door," Frank said. Inside, Arian sat waiting on the bed, wearing the cotton shift, her back straight. She looked at his hands, at the slip he carried, and froze. For a moment, her face didn't change. Then her breath caught, sharp. She stood slowly, as if afraid the room itself would shatter. "What is that?" "Your release." He held it out. She snatched it from him and read every line twice. Her hand shook. "This says, I'm free." Her voice cracked on the last word. "You are." Her eyes filled, but she refused to let the tears fall. "You can't be certain. They'll find another penalty, another trick. No, he shook his head firm. It's over. They don't own you anymore. For the first time, she let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. She clutched the slip to her chest, staring at him like she didn't know who he was anymore. You actually did it, she whispered. I told you I don't fail. Her knees buckled, but she caught herself, straightened, and crossed the room in 2 strides. She grabbed his shirt, pulled him down, and kissed him with a force that shook both of them. Her tears pressed against his face. He held her, one hand firm on her back, the other on her jaw, steadying her as if she might fall apart. When they finally pulled apart, her voice was raw. If I stay with you, it's as me, not as debt, not as a body they priced by the hour. Good, Frank said quietly. That's what I wanted. She searched his face, still trembling. Ask me. Don't command. Ask. Stay with me, he said. His voice was low but firm. Stay in my home. Eat with me. Sleep beside me. Argue with me. Touch me when you want. Push me when I'm stubborn. Stay because you want to. For a long moment, she didn't breathe. Then she said, I stay. The slip fell to the floor, forgotten. She kissed him again, slower this time, her hands sliding over his shoulders. He pulled her close, lifting her, carrying her to the bed. They undressed each other without hurry, without fear. The cotton shift slid away. His coat dropped to the floor. Their bodies met, not as transaction, not as rebellion, but as choice. Heat filled the room, not shame. Every touch was deliberate, every breath shared. After, they lay tangled together, her head on his chest, his arm wrapped firmly around her. For the first time, neither of them felt the weight of the system pressing in. The room was just theirs. Later, they walked through the city together. No guard stopped them. No clerks looked twice. Arian held the release folded in her hand like a shield, but she no longer needed it. Frank walked beside her, shoulders squared, not as a buyer, but as a man with someone he had chosen. In his apartment that evening, she cooked with what little they had left, Drax and mushrooms stir-fried with Zyron breadcrumbs. They sat on the floor, eating from the same bowl. She laughed softly when he complained about the salt, and for the first time the sound wasn't bitter. When night came, she stood by the window, looking at the city's flawless glass corridors and neon veins. They don't care if we live or die, she said. No, Frank agreed, stepping behind her, sliding his arms around her waist. But I care. That's enough. She leaned back into him, eyes closing, body finally easing. Then tomorrow, she whispered, we start living. And for the first time, she believed it. The city outside kept its schedule, cold and indifferent. But in that small room, 2 people had written an ending the system never intended. One built not on debt, but on choice. A story with no question marks left, only the quiet certainty of a future they would build together. Days had passed since Arian's release. The city still pulsed with the same sterile rhythm, but inside Frank's apartment, the air felt different. The shelves were still bare, the furniture still minimal, but now there was a softness in the space that hadn't been there before. Her presence. A cotton shift drying on the line. Strands of obsidian hair caught on his pillow. The faint scent of Drax and mushrooms simmered into the walls. It was late afternoon. They had spent the day outside, walking streets she once thought she would never walk freely again. She carried nothing but her folded release slip, tucked in her shirt pocket like a talisman, but she no longer clutched it with fear. They had shared a bowl of larnberry porridge at a market stall, eating from the same spoon, laughing quietly when the vendor scolded them for not buying separate portions. For the first time since her husband's death, Arian had laughed without bitterness. Now, back at the apartment, the light was fading. Frank brewed a small pot of Ferlin coffee while Arian leaned against the window, violet skin glowing faintly in the dim light. She wore one of his plain gray shirts that slipped off one shoulder. He carried the cups over, setting one in her hand. She sipped, watching him. You've given up everything for me, she said. I didn't give up, Frank replied. I traded empty shells for something worth filling them with. Her lips curved faintly. She set the cup down and walked toward him, bare feet silent on the floor. She stopped close enough that he could feel the warmth of her body. Do you regret it? Not for a second. She studied his face, searching for cracks. There were none. His gaze was steady, his jaw set, his posture calm. But when she slid her arms around his neck, she felt the tension there, the hunger he had been holding back for days. This time, she let him. She kissed him slowly, then harder, guiding him toward the bed with firm hands. He let her, his control steady, but his breath deepening. They moved together, unhurried, deliberate. She pulled his shirt over his head, her hands tracing the lines of his chest. His palms slid over her waist, up her back, memorizing every curve of Violet's skin. When he lifted her and laid her back on the bed, she did not flinch. She pulled him down with her, her legs wrapping around him. Their bodies pressed close, skin to skin, no distance left. Her breath came quick, his steady, both mixing in the dim room. They explored each other without fear, his mouth tracing her neck, her nails dragging lightly down his spine. He kissed her shoulders, her stomach, her thighs, every place that had once been reduced to a ledger entry, reclaiming it with patience and fire. She arched against him, guiding his hands, claiming her own body back in every touch. When they finally joined, it was not frantic but deep, deliberate. Every movement was controlled, every sound real. She held his face between her hands, her obsidian hair falling around them like a curtain. He moved with steady strength, each thrust careful, certain, answering her rhythm. She gasped his name, not as a plea, but as a declaration. Time stretched. The city outside kept its cold schedule, but here the world was heat, breath, and the sound of their bodies moving together. When release came, it was not a performance, but a surrender. Her to him to her, both holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled on the bed, the sheet half pulled across them, skin still damp, bodies pressed close. Her head rested on his chest, his arm wrapped firmly around her. She listened to his heartbeat, slow and steady. "I don't feel like a dead anymore," she whispered. "You never were," Frank answered. He kissed her hair and tightened his hold. Silence settled, heavy but warm. For the first time, both believed it was over. Not a pause, not a freeze, but an ending that belonged to them. Arian closed her eyes, letting herself rest fully for the first time in months. Frank kept watch, as he always did, but his eyes softened when he looked at her. She was no longer an hour on a ledger. She was his, and he was hers. The city outside kept moving, indifferent, but in that room, they had built something the system couldn't calculate. A home, a life, a future, and this time, there was no question mark left, only certainty.